Hello everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and in this year we will be learning Amir Hashem Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Kriyas Sefer Torah, and we begin a new Siman tonight. Siman Kuf Mem Dalid Shaloila Daleg Bat Torah Me Inyan LeInyan. The halacha that we are not allowed to skip around during laning in the Torah. The dinei HaTorah and the dinim that pertain to the laning of the HaTorah in the Navi, ubay dalet seifim, and here we have 4 seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, medalgin banavi, you're allowed to skip around when you're laning from a Navi. So when you're laning HaTorah from Nevi'im, you're allowed to skip around. Ve'ein medalgin baTorah mi parsha zu le parsha acheres. However, when you're laning from the Torah Kedosha, when you're laning from a Sefer Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, you're not allowed to skip around from one parsha to another parsha. Now let's remember that when we speak about parshas in the Torah, we're not speaking about Bereshis, Noach, Lech Lecha. We're speaking about parshas that's each section of the Torah. The different sections are separated by psuchos and stumos. That's where you have blank gaps in the writing of the Sefer Torah. Each section is a parsha. The Mechaber tells us here, you're not allowed to skip around from one parsha to another parsha. Continues the Mechaber and he says, Vahani mili b'shnei inyanim. This is true when you're skipping from one topic to another topic. And the reason you're not allowed to skip when you lane in the Torah, why are you not allowed to skip from one topic to another topic? Because we need to be concerned, Shema tispalbel das hashoimim. Maybe the ones that are listening to the Kriyas Sefer Torah, the tzibur, who's listening to the Kriya, they're going to get confused and they're going to get mixed up. And we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah why that's such a critical problem. Aval, however, bechad inyana, if you're laning one topic and you want to skip around, so you want to skip some psukim, but in the same topic, aval bechad inyana, if you're laning in one topic, kigoin, for example, acharei mois, if you're laning parshas acharei mois. Now, the very beginning of parshas acharei mois, it describes the avodah that was done in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur. So let's say you're laning kigoin acharei mois, and then you're going to skip the parshas Emor. So you have Achrei Mois, Kedoshim, Emor. So you're going to lane from the beginning of Parshas Achrei Mois. You're going to lane about the Avodah done in the Beis Hamikdash and Yom Kippur. Then when you finish that piece of Achrei Mois, you want to skip the Parshas Emor, and you want to lane in Parshas Emor the Parsha of Va'ach Be'osar L'Chodesh, where in Parshas Emor, the Torah Kedosha discusses Yom Kippur. It talks about the Isser Malacha on Yom Kippur. It talks about the need to fast on Yom Kippur. Shekain Gadol Kairei B'Yom HaKippurim. And this is actually the Kriyas HaTorah that the Kain Gadol laned in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur. He would lane from the beginning of Achrei Mois, and then he would skip the Parshas Emor and lane in Emor. So the Kain Gadol actually did skip in laning, when he was laning from the Sefer Torah. But that was in one inyan. All of the laning is about Yom Kippur. Then medalgin. Then you're allowed to skip, and continues the Mechaber, and he says, V'hu shelo yikra al peh. The reason we do this, the reason we allow the Kohen Gadol to skip from Achrei Mois to Emor, is because all of the laning that the Kohen Gadol is going to do on Yom Kippur is all in Yana D'Yoma. It's all Chayvus HaYom. It's all about Yom Kippur. And if we don't have him skip, what are we going to do? We're not going to lane everything from the beginning of Achrei Mois. We're not going to tell the Kohen Gadol to lane Gans Achrei Mois and Kedoshim and then Emor until after Ach Ba'asar. So the only other choice would be lane the beginning of Achrei Mois and then lane Balpeh. Lane Ach Be'osar, lane Balpeh, because we can't skip in the Sefer Torah. We're not going to do that, says the Mechaber. Who shall yikra al peh? We allow him to skip because we don't want to do any laning Balpeh. Sha'asa likra shalom and aksav afilu tevachas, because we're not allowed to lane Torah Balpeh, because Dvarim shebiksav iat Torah shoyler Balpeh. Remember, there's a halacha that Torah Shebiksav, really you're not supposed to say Baal Peh. So we can't have the Kohen Gadol say the parsha of Ach Basar L'Chodesh Baal Peh. So okay, so in that case, since it's Inyan Echad, we allow it to skip. Continues the Mechaber, he says, Ubanavi, but this halacha that we opened up the sif with, and we said that in the Navi you're allowed to skip, Ubanavi medalgin afilu b'shtein yonim. In Navi, you're allowed to skip even from one topic to another topic. But what you can't do, even in the Navi, is you can't lane a piece of Navi and then take 5 minutes to be goyel the klaf of the Navi because you want to lane somewhere else. That's Tircha de Tzibur, it's not Kavanat Tzibur. The Tzibur is standing there and waiting. V'hani mili b'Navi echad, and even in Navi, where we say you're allowed to skip, that's only in one Navi. So you're laning Yeshaya, you could skip within Yeshaya. You're laning in Shmuel, like we did today. The HaTorah of Parshas Korach is in Shmuel. If you're laning in Shmuel and you want to skip around in Shmuel, you can skip around in Shmuel. Avla minavi lenavi ein medalgin, but you cannot skip from Sefer Shmuel to Sefer Malachim. That you can't do. Treyasar medalgin b'navi lenavi, but within Treyasar, you're allowed to skip from one navi to another because they're very, very short. However, you're not allowed to go backwards. You're not allowed to skip from closer to the end of a Sefer of Navi to closer to the beginning. You can't move backwards. Okay. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. The Mechaber opened up by saying Medalgin Banavi. When you lane in the Nevi'im, you're allowed to skip around. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Banavi, Hainu lefi mashi yadua. This is because it's well known, the Medina, that me'ikar adin ein al HaTorah banavi psukim miyuchadim. Really, me'ikar adin, there's no specific laning that we have to lane on any given Shabbos. This that we have, that you could look in the Chumash and you could see HaTorah leparshas Korach is in Sefer Shmuel. That's the minig. But me'ikar adin, we don't really have given psukim that must be laned on any given Shabbos. This is kind of similar to what we learned about the laning on Monday and Thursday and Shabbos afternoon. We have a Takanas Moshe Rabbeinu and then a Takanas Ezra to lane on Monday and Thursday. But it's like we said many times, this week Monday we're going to lane Parshas Chukas because the minig became that on Monday and Thursday we lane the beginning of the coming Shabbos Sedra. But that's really only a minig. Me'ikar adin, it doesn't matter what we lane. The Takanas Moshe Rabbeinu was only that we need to hear reading out of the Sefer Torah. According to some Rishonim, it doesn't even have to be out of the Sefer Torah, but we need to hear reading of Torah every 3 days. So we have to lane something on Monday and Thursday. The minig became that we lane the coming week Sedra. So too by the HaTorah b'Navi. We're maftir in the Navi. We read a HaTorah from the Navi. No, since we're making a HaTorah b'Navi, we try to make it something that's similar to that week's Parsha. But what if you have something else that's similar to that week's Parsha, other than the given HaTorah? Really, you can lane that. So it's not a choivas hayoim that you must lane the HaTorah that's printed in the Chumash on that given Shabbos. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, this halacha that we have over here, Medalgin Manavi, you're allowed to skip around in the Navi. What do you mean you're allowed to skip around in the Navi? Isn't there a given laning that you're supposed to lane from the Navi? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, Maker, then there isn't. Hainu lefi mashi yadua de medina ein al HaTorah b'Navi psukim yuchadim. Really, Maker Adim, there are no specific psukim in the Navi that we must read on any given week. And therefore, we can have a halacha that you're allowed to skip around. Rak shetzarich liyos me'ein hasedra. The only real requirement is that the laning, the topic of the laning in the Navi, does have to be me'ein hasedra. It has to be similar to the Sedra. And against that backdrop, the Mechaber is letting us know the mutter lahamafta b'Navi ledalig mi parsha zula parsha acheres, that really the one who's laning from the Navi, if he found a few psukim over here that are me'ein hasedra, and then he found a few psukim over there that are Me'ein HaSedra, and he wants to skip around, really he's allowed to. V'chein haminig b'kama haftarus, and the truth is that this is the minig in several haftarus that we have during the year, shemaisifa lehem psukim miparshias acheros, that we actually do skip around. The haftarah for Shabbos Shuvah, we skip around. There are other haftarahs where we skip around. So you're allowed to skip around in the Navi. That was the opening halacha of the Mechaber, Medalgin Manavi. And then the Mechaber said, Ve'ein Medalgin BaTorah. But you're not allowed to skip around when you're laning from the Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Beis, Ve'ein Medalgin BaTorah. Hainu b'sheni v'chamishi. This is really Negeya on Monday and Thursday. Titzarek Medina Likrais Rakasar Psukim Litlas Gavri. Where the only requirement of the laning on Monday and Thursday is, like we said earlier, only that you must lane 10 psukim, a minimum of 10 psukim, and you must have 3 aliyahs. But which 10 psukim in the Torah Kedosha that you lane on Monday and Thursday is up for grabs, if not for the minig. But again, the same way by the Navi, Me'ikar Adin, you could lane anywhere you want in the Navi and be Yotzed Haftarah b'Navi. So too on any given Monday and Thursday, really, Me'ikar Adin, you could lane any 10 psukim and have 3 aliyahs, and you could be Yotzed the laning. So that's why this halacha of Ein Medalgin BaTorah is really Negeya on Monday and Thursday, when Me'ikar Adin, you could lane whatever 10 psukim you want. So you might think, I can make up a new kriya. I'll call up Kayin, I'll lane 3 psukim for Parshas Bereshis, then I'll call up Levi and I'll lane 3 psukim for Parshas Noach, then I'll call up Yisrael and I'll lane the remaining 4 required psukim for Parshas Lech Lecha. Because it doesn't matter what I lane anyway. Kamash Malon the Mechaber, no. Medalgin Manavi, you're allowed to skip around in the Navi, ve'ein Medalgin BaTorah. In the Torah, you're not allowed to skip around, even though there's no specific requirement to lane a specific 10 psukim, but you've got to pick 10 psukim together. You can't go ahead and jump around. Oy be Yomtiv, or this halacha could also be negay on Yomtiv, the tzarich likreis chamisha gavri, when you need 5 aliyahs. But again, what psukim you're going to lane for the 5 aliyahs at Yomtiv? Other than a minig, it's really up for grabs. So you might think I could skip around. That would be an interesting kriya. Maybe Pesach will lane 3 psukim from the beginning of Golus Mitzrayim, then we'll lane 3 psukim of the Makis, and then we'll lane 3 psukim of Kriyas Yamsuf. We'll make a very interesting kriya, and we'll make 5 aliyahs out of it. No, you can't do that. Ein l'kreisam l'chatchila b'diluk, rak yeseder. You're really not allowed to jump around. You have to have 1 kriya, 5 aliyahs on Yom Tov, a cohesive set of psukim. You have to lane them keseder. Now, why is this so important? What's behind this halacha of Ein Medalgin BaTorah? So the Mechaber said, Shema tizbalbel das hashoimim, because the listeners, the tzibur that are listening to the laning, if you're going to jump around, they might get confused. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why is this such a problem? Lefisha divrei Torah, divrei azharos va'onshin u'mitzvos. When you're laning from the Torah, you're laning halacha. When you lane from the Torah, you're laning Torah shebiksav, you're laning daraisa. And if it's Sarshi Kansu Belev Hashoimim, we have to make sure that people hear the Kriya, they hear it right, and they understand what they're hearing. And if you're going to jump around from one topic to another topic, it's not easy for people to follow the paper trail and keep track of what they're hearing, and they might confuse things, and they might come up with something that's completely wrong. I don't know, you'll start laning from the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, and you're laning the Parshas about the Carbon Oila and the Carbon Shlamim, and then you're going to skip and you're going to start laning about the Carbon Omer that you bring on Pesach, and someone's going to think that, oh, I remember I was listening to the Kriyas HaTorah yesterday, and they were laning the Parsha of the Oila, and we said that by an Oila, you have to bring an Omer of barley as part of a Carbon Oila. Huh? It's because you went Me'inyan, and now you're confusing issues. And in Torah, which is Torah Shebiksav, which is Daraisa, you can't do that. You can't lead people to confusion. Masha'enkein b'neviim. Neviim, you're laning on the surface, only on the surface. When you're laning from Navi, you're laning history, you're laning stories. So if you'll mix up something that happened by Shimshon to something that happened by Devorah and Barak, okay, no, so you'll think that Shimshon was the one who killed Sisera. Okay, you're going to be confused, but you're not going to come to be over any Surim because of it. So by Navi, we could jump around. Then the Mechaber gave an example. The Mechaber said that when are you not allowed to jump around in laning in Torah? That's when you're going from one topic to another topic. But if you're staying on the same topic, you could jump around. And the example that the Mechaber gave was the Kriyas HaTorah that the Kohen Gadol laned in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Dalet, Ki Kohen Achrei Mois V'ach Ba'asar. Ritzon L'Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Af Apishi Yesh Hefsek Rav Beineihen, even though between these two parshas, there's a long gap in the Sefer Torah. Shezeh B'Parshas Achrei, the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash of Yom Kippur is the very beginning of Parshas Achrei Mois. V'zeh B'Parshas Emor, and the parsha of Ach Ba'asar L'Chodesh that describes Yom Kippur, the Issa Malacha, the need to fast, that's in Parshas Emor. So you have from the beginning of Parshas Achrei Mois, then you have the rest of Achrei Mois, then Gans Parshas Kedoshim, then the beginning of Parshas Emor, until you finally get Ach Ba'asar. Afilu Hachi, still in all, Kevin the Tarvayim Inyan Yom Kippurim, since they're both of these parshas are discussing Yom Kippur, Mutar L'Dalig V'Lekroisem Yachad, you're allowed to skip and lane them together. V'hu Adin, and another very common example of this, that is the gear to us nowadays, where we skip, a laning where we do skip. V'hu Adin Ma'ashenei Hagin B'Tainis Tzibur, every Tainis Tzibur, Kishekaren Vayechal, when we lane the Kriyas HaTorah of a Tainis Tzibur of Vayechal, we skip. B'Parshas Kisisa, Shemedalgin L'Psal L'cha. The first aliyah starts Vayechal. After the first aliyah, after the Kohen, we skip to Vayomer Hashem al Moshe Psal L'cha Shtei Luchos Avadim Karishonim. We skip a whole amud in the Sefer Torah. V'hainu Gam Ke Mitam Shem Inyan Echad, because that's one Inyan. It's talking about Moshe Rabbeinu davening on behalf of Klal Yisrael after the Chet HaEgel, and so to speak, persuading the Rebbeinu Shalom to forgive Klal Yisrael for the Chet HaEgel. It's an Inyan Echad. Ois Katan Hey, V'hu Shalo Yikra. The words of the Mechaber are very interesting over here. If you go back to the Mechaber, the third line down, the Mechaber said, in Chad and Yonah, in one topic, you're allowed to skip around. Then the Mechaber said, Kigoin, for example, Achrei Mois V'ach Ba'asar Shekohen Gadol Kairei B'Yom HaKippurim Medalgen. Then said the Mechaber, V'hu Shalo Yikra. Excuse me. V'hu Shalo Yikra Al Peh. Now, the way you would teach that normally, the normal way to teach those words would be, it's mutter to skip from one place to another if you're staying within one topic, v'hu shelo yikra al peh, as long as you don't lane bal peh. Now, obviously, that's not what it means here. So I teached it when I read it to you. I teached it v'hu shelo yikra al peh. The reason why we're matir you to skip within one topic, like we allow the Kohen Gadol to do so in the Beis HaMikdash by Kriyas HaTorah on Yom Kippur, is v'hu shelo yikra al peh, in order so that he should not lane bal peh, because he has to lane the beginning of Achrei Mois that describes the Avodah. He has to lane Ach Ba'asar L'Chodesh at Parshas Emor that describes Yom Kippur. And what else are we going to do? If we don't tell him that he can skip in the Sefer Torah, so then what are we going to do? The only other choice would be to have him lane something bal peh. That we can't do because Dvarim Shabiksavi HaTorah Shelo Ibram al peh. So I based this on the Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Hay. The Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Hay says, "V'hu shelo yikra ritzayna loymar." What the Mechaber wants to say is, "Delekachi tiru l'daleg." This is why we were matter the Kohen Gadol to skip v'ligla la sefer la parsha ashniya, and to roll the Sefer Torah all the way to Emor in middle of the laning after hu min karmilsa, even though it's going to be very obvious to everybody that he's skipping, and normally we don't skip. Why? Kadei shelo yavo likra ashniya bal peh. because we have to allow him to do this so that he shouldn't end up laning ach ba'asar balpeh. There's that asar, and that would be asar because dvarim shebiksav yatar asher la'omar malpeh. Then the Mechaber said another halacha. The Mechaber said in Navi you're allowed to skip, but said the Mechaber that's only v'hu shelo yisha b'dilug b'inyan sheyamdu atzibur b'shtika. You can't skip around in the Navi if you're going to be busy being girl the cloth of the Navi, and everybody in the tzibur is just sitting there like dummies, sitting on their thumbs. You can't do that. Shelo yisha. Bizmaneyen how you regilim l'targem ben pasuk l'pasuk. The Chavetz Chaim points out that in the time of the Mechaber, you were able to be goyel the cloth of the Navi and not have the people sitting there on their thumbs quietly. Why? Because in those days they had a meturgaman. What would happen is the Balkare would lay in a pasuk, and then the meturgaman, which literally means the translator, would translate. He would teach the pasuk to the tzibur and explain it. And then they would lay in the next pasuk, and so on and so on and so on. Explains the Chavetz Chaim when the Mechaber says that you're allowed to skip in the Navi as long as the tzibur is not going to have to sit there quietly waiting for you. In the time of the Mechaber, there was an eitz of how to do this, and that was that while the Meturgaman was explaining the pasuk, you would be goyel to the next place that you're skipping to. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says here in Eis Katan Vav. Because Maneim in those days, how you regilim l'targem ben pasuk l'pasuk. They would have a meturgaman who would speak between each pasuk. Va'ashmi'inon, and the Mechaber is letting us know sheyu kroivim ha'inyanim zeh lazeh, that the two places, the place that you're skipping from and the place that you're skipping to, should be close enough kol kach ad shelo yisha adil yoyser v'kedei sheyisak haturgaman, so that you could be goyel from place A to place B during the time that the Meturgaman is giving his little speech. So that when the Meturgaman finishes his speech, the Balkari could pick up already right away from place B, and it's not that the tzibur is sitting around quietly. Why is this a problem? She'ain covered l'tzibur, she'yamdu b'shtika v'yamtinu. Because it's not covered for the tzibur that you're by the bima, busy being goyel the cloth, while the tzibur is sitting there with nothing to do. The Kasra Paiskim, and the Paiskim write, the Bizmanenu she'ein regilam l'targem, nowadays when we don't have a meturgaman, so you would think, okay, so now all bets are off. Nowadays, I guess you can't skip from place to place, even in the Navi, because we don't have a meturgaman. So while we're busy skipping from place to place, the tzibur is going to be sitting there quietly. So you might think that nowadays that we don't have a meturgaman, you're simply not allowed to skip. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. The Paiskim say that nowadays, even though we don't have a meturgaman, nami shari, it's still mutter to skip. Why? He explains the Chavetz Chaim, kevan shekal ha'haftaris ksuva bizmanenu bekuntris b'fnei atzman oy b'chumashin. Because nowadays, it's not that common to have a cloth. Nowadays, most shuls don't have the Navi written in parchment, in a scroll, on a cloth, that you have to be goyel from one place to another. Instead, they're learning from a chumash, or they're learning from a sefer of haftarahs. So you just flip the page. It's not a big deal. You have a table of contents, and you know that I'm going to start the Kriya on page 272, and then I'm going to skip to page 374. So you finish the first piece, and you just flip to the next place. Doesn't take any time. It's no big deal. Halo yakal l'samein, so you can put in a bookmark, or l'chapes maher, and to search quickly all of the psukim that you want to learn as part of this haftarah. And therefore, even though we don't have a meturgaman, the tzibur is not going to end up sitting quietly on their thumbs while you're busy being goyel l'sefer, because you're not being goyel l'sefer. You're just flipping pages in the chumash. Here you see, by the way, from the Chavetz Chaim, that it was very uncommon to have the Nevi'im on a cloth. V'lachein shari, umitam zeh mutter bizbanenu afilu kishapsukim v'hem mishnei Nevi'im. And the Mishnah Berurah says that he brings this down from the Pri Megadim. He says because of this, nowadays you're even allowed to skip from one Navi to another Navi. Even if you want to skip from the beginning of Yeshua to somewhere in Yeshaya. What's the big deal? It's just put a bookmark in the page that you want to go to in Yeshaya, and when you finish the psukim that you want to learn from Yeshua, you'll give one flip, and then you're in Yeshaya, and you'll learn the psukim you want to learn from Yeshaya. Ois Cotton Zion, the Mechaber said, "Mi navi lenavi ein medalgin." You're not allowed to skip from one navi to another. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Zion. Why? The ikatir fadas biyoser midai. Because even though we're saying that in navi we're not afraid that people are going to become confused, and it's not Torah, it's navi, it's not as critical, it's not mitzvahs, it's not dinim, but still to go from Yeshua, that's telling you the stories of how they conquered Eretz Yisrael, and to go from that to Yirmiyah, where we're talking about Yirmiyah giving Techacha to Klai Yisrael at the time of the Churban, that's too much of a jump, and people are going to get confused, and it's just not right. But again, this is only a problem in two different topics. But if it would be one topic, and you want to skip from one Navi to another, even back in the day when they had a cloth, it sounds like it would be okay, as long as you could do it during the time that the tzibur doesn't have to sit there quietly. But within Trei Asar, you could skip from one Navi to another. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Shem Chashuvim Kenavi Yechad Le'inyan Zeh, because the whole Trei Asar is considered like one Navi in the context of this halacha. Why? Because each Navi is so short. So you skipped from Tzvanya to Chabakuk, it's not a big deal. Mimnei Shem Kitzarim, because they're short. Ois Cotton Tess. The Mechaber said you're not allowed to skip from the end to the beginning. What the Mechaber wants to say is, you can't skip backwards. Even if the place that you're skipping from to the place that you're skipping to is very close, you can't go backwards. The Mishnah Berurah says there are different opinions amongst the Paiskim. There are those that say what the Mechaber means over here is that this that you're not allowed to skip minavi lenavi is only if you're going backwards. But within one navi, let's say within Yeshaya, in other words, there are those that learn the Mechaber that within one navi you're always allowed to skip, and you're even allowed to skip backwards within one navi. It's from one navi to another navi that you're not allowed to go backwards. But the Magen Avram takes the position that even in one navi you don't go backwards. Take a look at the Pri Megadim who takes the position to be inyan echad b'navi echad mutar likros l'mafreya, that within one navi and within one topic you could skip even going backwards. Says the Mechaber Sif Beis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down at the end of the line. Says the Mechaber, Noihagin b'Shabbos sheyesh by chasen. The words of the Mechaber, we are Noihagin, that when there's a chasen in shul on Shabbos, Loimer achar HaTorah, let's skip the Ramah for a moment. Loimar achar HaTorah hashavua, after you lane the regular HaTorah of that Shabbos, afterwards you lane shnayim or shloisha psukim, 2 or 3 psukim, me HaTorah's sois osis, from the laning of sois osis, which is in Yeshaya Samach Aleph Yud. So the halacha that the Mechaber is saying over here is that there was a minig that when there was a chasen in shul, you want to be mesameach the chasen, you want to be part of, be marbid a simcha. So there was a minig that what they would do is they would lane that week's HaTorah. So like this week the HaTorah was in Shmuel, and then when they finished this week's HaTorah, they would open up Yeshaya, and they would lane from Yeshaya 2 or 3 psukim from the parsha in Yeshaya that begins sois osis. Now let's take a look at the Ramah in the parentheses. HaTorah. What is this word HaTorah? What is this? Maftir, HaTorah. What is this word? Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say Shehu Miloshen Ein Maftir in Achar Pesach. It's based on the Loshen of the Mishnah Ein Maftir in Achar Pesach Afikoimen. And what's the Maftir? The Maftir is kind of like a dessert. She'en Yonai Siluk. It means the end, leaving, going away. Keloimar siluk tefillah shachris. What's dessert? Dessert is the end of the meal. We're finishing the meal. We're leaving the meal. The last thing that we have is dessert. Ein maftirin akar pesach afikomen. After the afikomen, we don't eat a dessert anymore. The afikomen was the dessert. What's the HaTorah? The HaTorah is when we're leaving Shachris. The end of Shachris is the HaTorah. Shachris doesn't end before Kriyas HaTorah. Kriyas HaTorah is part of Shachris. So the whole Kriyas HaTorah is part of Shachris. The HaTorah is the last piece of Shachris. Okay, so now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut yud noihagen. V'tama minig. What was the reason for this minig? To lay in sois asis for a chasen. After kama pa'amim misra meishu minavi lenavi. Even though many times, if you're going to lay in sois asis, which is in Yeshua, so that means that you're going to be medalig benavi. But not only are you going to be medalig benavi, you're going to skip from one navi to another navi, which we said you're not allowed to do, right? We said medalgin banavi. But ubenavi medalgin, the Mechaber said, minavi lenavi ain't medalgin. You're not allowed to skip from one navi to another. So a Shabbos like this, when we lay in the HaTorah in Shmuel, how would we be allowed to skip to Yeshaya to learn Seis Asis? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, Mishum de Mea Talmud, Hayu Kol Asfarim Nichtavim Begilyon. Because the whole Isser, again, the whole Isser of skipping from one navi to another is based on Kavod HaTzibur. And since they had klaf, and they had individual scrolls, so, they would have to spend time closing up the Shmuel, taking out the Yeshaya, rolling to Saisasis in the Yeshaya, and that wouldn't be covered at Tzibur. But by us, where the Mishnah Berurah says in most places they either had pamphlets of the HaTorah or they had them printed in a Chumash, so halo yokalasi siman shiyim tzamayer. So what's the big deal to learn Saisasis? Again, put in a bookmark and flip to Saisasis. Now let's continue here in the Mechaber. We are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines up from the bottom in the Mechaber, the beginning of the line. Ukeshachal Rosh Chodesh b'Shabbos u'b'Yom Rishon. Let's say we have 2 days Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh is Shabbos and Sunday. Now, the HaTorah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh is Hashamayim Kisi v'Ha'aretz Hadoim Raglai. Eizabayis Yivduli v'Eizamakayim Menuchasi. That's in Yeshaya Perek Samach Vav. So that's in Yeshaya. So says the Mechaber, Ukeshachal Rosh Chodesh b'Shabbos u'b'Yom Rishon. Let's say you have Rosh Chodesh 2 days. The first day is Shabbos, the second day is Sunday. Acher shemaftirin HaTorah b'Shabbos. After you finish the laning of Hashamayim Kisi, which is in Yeshaya, Aimrim Pasuk Rishon u'Pasuk Achron, you lane the first pasuk and the last pasuk. Me'afteres v'yomer lo yahainasan Machar Chodesh. The laning of Machar Chodesh, let's say it would be only 1 day Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh would be Sunday. Then we would lane Machar Chodesh. Machar Chodesh is in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Chaf, Pasuk Yud Ches. Says the Mechaber, when you have 2 days Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos and Sunday, so first we're going to lay in Hashamayim Kisi, because that's the HaTorah for Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, but then we want to allude to the fact that tomorrow is also Rosh Chodesh, so we lay in the first pasuk and the last pasuk of Machar Chodesh. Now again, we're skipping from one navi to another. We're skipping from Hashamayim Kisi, which is in Yeshaya, to Machar Chodesh, which is in Shmuel. Says the Mechaber, Ve'ein limchais b'yadam, and you should protest against places that do this. V'ayel kaman sibetav chav hei sif beis ubesayv sibetav chav ches sif ches hayach noyagin. What our minig is. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois kan yud aleph, Omer pasuk rishon, we lay in the first pasuk and the last pasuk of Machar Chodesh, lezecher shalamachar Rosh Chodesh, to allude to the fact that Sunday is also Rosh Chodesh. Yud beis, v'ayel kaman sibet tavchav hei, hainu disham nisbar, dekayoy mei noyagin l'dali navi l'lavi klal. Nowadays, our minig is, we don't skip from one navi to another navi at all. Okay, we're going to stop over here, and we'll continue next time at Mirza Hashem with Siv Gimel. I'm happy that I was able to squeeze in an extra share over here so that we get closer to the Dirshu schedule. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss for limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshua's for us, Parnassus should do them to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the BS God Tzedek, B'Meher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.